You already know what this video is about, so let's jump right into it. In this video, I'm going to talk about an accounting salary. How much money can you make as an accountant? I'm going to give you a short answer and then a long answer because I'm going to bring up something you're probably not expecting. Now, short answer, you're looking at, in terms of the average accounting salary of about $60 to $70K a year. So $60 to $70,000 a year is, I'd say, the average accounting salary. Now, of course, every accountant knows there are so many different types of accounting. Most people just look at accounting and they think taxes, right? Definitely not true, as we all know, whether it's auditing or tax or bookkeeping, even just those subjects can be broken down more specifically, whether you're doing, like, say, auditing for the Big Four versus being like an internal auditor, or like, say, if you're doing taxes for big businesses, or you're doing more personal taxes, helping out friends, family, you build like a clientele list, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's so many different types of accounting, but overall, I'd say as a short answer, 60 to 70K on average. Now, of course, the more that you work, like, say, if you're working at a regional firm, the Big Four, whatever, the more you work, sounds kind of stupid to say, but I have to say it, the more money you make, right? If, let's say, you're looking to make partner, for example, sometimes you're looking at 400 to 500K a year. So about $500,000 a year, give or take a little bit here and there. So as you can imagine, the higher up you go, the more money you can make. However, I do want to make this point, and again, I'm going to talk about this in a couple of different ways on this video, that one, although accountants do make a good amount of money starting out. I remember when I started as an accountant, I was working at the Big Four, started in September of 2012, and being ultra transparent, my starting salary was $57,000 a year. I made way more money than any of my friends, besides my accounting friends. I made way more money than any of my other friends. There's a couple asterisks on that, though. One is, remember, and I've mentioned this in a bunch of accounting videos, they can work you, and they do, as hard as they want. And I remember making a spreadsheet being like, I'm making like $12 an hour. It's like that famous scene from Napoleon Dynamite when he goes, that's like $1 an hour. That's what it's like working at the Big Four. And this is not even talking about busy season, which if you do the math out, you can be making $4 to $5 an hour, actually probably less, depending on how hard your client is, et cetera, et cetera. Remember, with the Big Four, this is true for any salary position, but definitely worse for the Big Four, that when you work at the Big Four, because your salary, they can work you as hard as they want and exploit you as much as they want for as many hours as they can. And this also depends upon your client. I had some friends who, like, say, working your traditional 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, they made about $57K a year. I had other friends who got put on a horrible client and they were working 70, 80 hours a week on average, making the same amount. So although, starting off with your accounting salary, like, say, right out of college, making about $60K a year, we were like, oh, $60K a year. I was living in Boston. I'm like, this is going to be great. But then you realize, the hourly rate is pretty bad. And if you get a bad client, it's even worse. That's the first thing I definitely have to mention when it comes to the salary. The second thing, and this is a very unpopular opinion, potentially, depending on the accountant, but for me, being big into math and accounting, I guess accountingception here in terms of the accounting of accounting with accounting salaries, when you look at a lot of the average salaries and the growth compared to a lot of other industries, I'm going to be honest, accountants don't make as much money as you think. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, like, say, 60 or 70K a year is bad per se, right? Obviously, everybody has different goals about how much money they want to make a year. It depends on where you live, right? There's a lot of different factors. But I do want to mention that when it comes to accounting and staying in accounting, yes, with the Big Four, if you somehow grind it out and make partner, and remember, not everybody makes partner, keep in mind. Yes, you can potentially make a lot, but I think when people think of accounting, they think, oh, accountants make tons of money. I gotta be honest, the average isn't bad. And when I graduated college, obviously my starting salary was great. However, the growth from there, in my opinion, is a lot smaller and slower compared to other industries. When I looked at some of my friends who, like, say, did computer programming, no surprise, computer programmers make bank, their growth in terms of their average salary was light years faster in terms of their raises and how much money they were making than it was for me as an accountant. If I look at a lot of other industries, one of my friends, for example, is a traveling nurse. As we all know, the nursing industry is, in my opinion, one of the most, if not the most important industry, period, right? The entire medical field. And any nurse knows, traveling nurses make ridiculous amounts of money. One of my friends was sending me job postings, and I remember being like, oh, wow, like $7K a month as a traveling nurse, and they pay for your housing and everything? And he goes, Mark, you missed the fine print. It's not $7K a month, it's $7K a week, because this is a very coveted, desired area for nurses, and they pay for your housing and everything. I'm like, wow, people thought accountants make a lot of money, but traveling nurses make way more. And I'm just using those as a couple different examples. But overall, although yes, I think the average accounting salary isn't bad, do not get me wrong. When you compare it to a lot of other fields, take even finance, for example, investment bankers versus the Big Four, it's not even a close comparison. And when you work at the Big Four, again, depending upon your client, you could work quasi-investment banking hours while making a third of what investment bankers make, right? Investment banking, when you start into it, horrible hours, but pay to reflect those horrible hours. With the Big Four, you could even have those same hours with just a third of the pay. Not worth it at all, in my opinion. However, with all that being said, the big thing I really have to talk about is the post-accounting life. So take the Big Four, prime example. I've mentioned before, Big Four, horrible pay, et cetera, et cetera. There's pros and cons to the Big Four. And I've mentioned this as well, that I look at the Big Four as a great springboard, in the sense that you hit it, you have to hit it hard, it's grueling work, but the second you leave, it shoots you off and you have a ton of opportunities. I still get job offers to this day. Over a decade ago, I worked at the Big Four, keep in mind. I still get job offers over a decade later of people saying, hey, Mark, we saw that you have the Big Four on your resume. If you ever want to come back to accounting, we have this open position. We think you'd be a perfect fit, which is pretty awesome, right? And using that springboard analogy again, it can shoot you up way higher than you can expect. I have friends who are now making well above six figures. I'm talking crazy, high-paying jobs. And when I talk to them, and this is kind of like a behind-the-scenes type thing, they're like, Mark, I'm not gonna lie, I'm making $120K a year. I work maybe 9 to 3, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes my weeks, I only work a few hours a week. I ask them if they need anything else from me. They don't. So I just kind of watch Netflix. I just watch this new show. Have you seen Dark yet? Or something like that. And I'm like, wait, really? So you're working, 3 to 10 hours a week, maybe, and you're making like 120K. Now, of course, not every job is going to be like that and everything. And I'm not saying my friends are lazy. They're super hard workers, but that just shows that with the Big Four, when you have it on your resume, once you leave, although yes, there's almost like I don't call it a glass ceiling, but maybe that's the best phrase to use. There is a bit of a glass ceiling that, yeah, you can make more money working at the Big Four, but it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of years, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but one of the smartest accountants I ever met said that the only people who stay at the Big Four are the average and the stubborn. The stubborn because they're like, hey, I'm going to work at one company only, that's it. And the average, because they're like, oh, you know what? Obviously, if you work at the Big Four, you are smart. But for everybody working at the Big Four, they realize, wait, I can either work potentially 60 or 70 hours a week and make 65K, or I can make 120K working 40 hours a week, and the job is a lot more manageable, way less hours, and just way more fun and enjoyable overall. Which one would you pick? And that is the big thing about the Big Four, that although, yes, the accounting salary at first, when you look at the trajectory, isn't the craziest, especially compared to a lot of other industries, having that Big Four on your resume can help propel you to make significantly more money.